Good morning. I'd like to call the March Kansas State Board of Education meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody here today. All board members, we have one, Ann Ma is not present, but she is participating by phone. And Ben Jones texted me this morning. He's on his way, but hit a little fog. Oh, he just rolled in. Okay, so Ben is here. So all members are present either in person or one by telephone. So thank you very much. And we would like to welcome everybody who's here or listening via the web. We appreciate all the folks participating in our meeting in one way or another. I do believe we have somebody here from the Kelly organization. We've got Craig Elliott's here, and you have somebody here. So would you come up and introduce your superintendent, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Board. First of all, just thanks so much for the support that the State Board provides for the Kansas Educational Leadership Institute program out of K-State. This is my 5th year as a mentor and thoroughly enjoy working with the young people who are going to be a lot more successful than I was. So with me today is Dr. Adams from Chanute, and I'll have him introduce himself.
Great.
Good morning, Kellen Adams from Chanute. This is my 1st year, and just want to say thank you to all of you for all of your support and everything you do for us in USD 413.
Okay, thank you very much,
you.
and thanks for being here. Okay, the mission of the Kansas State Board of Education is to prepare Kansas students for lifelong success through rigorous, quality academic instruction, career training, and character development according to each student's gifts and talents. Our Kansas vision is to lead the world in the success of each student. And at this time, I'd ask for us to all have a moment of silence. Thank you very much. And you, if you would please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We are going to, I'm going to amend the agenda today. We are going to add an informational item regarding the coronavirus and guidance that the department is giving as far as our schools are concerned. That will be after the Milk and Educator, which is scheduled at 11:30 and before we go to lunch break. So I am requesting that amendment to the agenda. And do we have any other changes to today's agenda? Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Since it's been 3 years since I came up with a document at Brother Porter's urging on what I would emphasize to lead the world in the success of each student, it's been 3 years. I would like to take about 10 minutes today and review that document. I don't know where it would fall in the agenda, but I would like to respectfully request about 10 minutes to carve out to go over what's come to be known as my talking points, because it has been 3 years this month.
I would suggest we add that under the chairman's report. Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Any other additions or for the agenda? Okay, so in addition to the adding the coronavirus item, do we have a second? I guess we don't need a second for that, but how about all in favor for that amendment and the agenda as a motion Peggy's giving me? Okay, we need to have a formal motion for. I'll do that. Okay, Janet will do that. Do we have a second? Dina. Okay, thank you very much. Now, all in favor of the agenda as amended, please raise your hand. No, we're voting to accept the agenda as amended. Both. The whole thing, yeah. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Ann, anything on that? Okay, so that's 10-0. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll get through that little piece. Okay, now we have the February minutes. Moments. I think it's going to be one of those days today, you know?
You sound like me now.
Having some moments today.
Welcome to my world.
Okay, how about any corrections or additions to the minutes of the February agenda? I'll go with that. Okay, Dina will make the motion. Do I have a second? Mr. McNeese. Okay, all in favor approving the February minutes? Thank you. Jane, Ann? Aye. Okay, 10-0. Thank you. Okay, I got through that. Very good. Okay, now we will go on to the commissioner's report. So Commissioner Watson, welcome. We're glad to have you share some information with us today.
Madam Chair, thank you. And I think that the Vice Chair wanted to point out, maybe it's because you changed hotels and dumped us last night at the Ramada that we're starting off. It wasn't that great breakfast that Mr. Porter would have had this morning. So thank you, all of you. This is kind of a go back in time, but I kind of presentation for you today, and talk about why we need to change education in Kansas. And this is something that all of you know. I was asked to do a presentation to the Governor's Council a few weeks ago, and Jim and Kathy represent you on that. And afterwards, a couple of superintendents came up and said, that was really good. And I thought, well, there's nothing new in that, but it was kind of a condensed, really short version. And then I was asked, someone said, are you going to present that to the Kansas, Missouri superintendents that I was going to be at the following week? And I said, sure. And I did that. And outside the Missouri superintendents, which would have been new information, the Kansas people said, that's really good. So I thought, you know, I'm going to share this with the board. You're going to say, nothing new, but even our staff said just maybe the way it's done. You also have access to this. This is your work that I'm going to talk about. And really, Mr. Roberts, why I do think, yeah, we can still get there, why we really need to change and go forward. You'll remember, and I reminded Janet because she was at the Kansas Can Symposium when Brad and I did this together. But I said it was 2014, and the board at the time said, you know, one of the things we have to take a look at is as we end the No Child Left Behind era, and we're trying to figure out what is it that we need to do. One of the things that the board, and many of you were there, said many educators have lost hope. They really need to have a path lit up for them. It says, not only this is where we're going, this is how we can get there. And so, as you know, we're working really hard on the KISA part of this, which is kind of how we get there. And as we kind of move into that new and improved model, will even be better. You know, I've said this many times. What I really find instructive as someone that studies history is when Kennedy made this challenge, he would not have been in office, even if he had not been assassinated, to see us land on the moon. That's what to me is really bold, is whenever someone says, I know I'm not going to be in office, be your president to see this, but we still ought to make that commitment. And it was a huge commitment, and one in which we poured a lot of resources in. It's similar, a huge commitment when we say we're going to re-engineer public education in order to move every kid to be successful. It's the same undertaking that you've embarked, and we're going to actually hear a student tomorrow from Jean's area that's going to talk in a very human way about some things that she's doing. So, you know, Brad and I went out, 20 different locations, over 2,000 Kansans. We asked 3 simple questions. Those 3 simple questions still inform our work today. In fact, I'm going to talk to you about the work that we've done on those 3 questions. Number 1 question, when you think of a successful young adult living in our state, please describe that person in vivid detail. Skill sets, characteristics, attributes, just you get it in your mind's eye, write it down. Over 2,000 Kansans said 70% of those skills are not things you measure on a test. Came back, went to Mike O'Neill, who was president of the Kansas Chamber at the time, said, you know, when people came in, Janet was at one of those sessions in Wyandotte, we had them sign in and say, you know, who are you? Mark could have come in and said, I'm a parent, or I'm a board member, or I'm an attorney. But when we self-analyzed the results, we didn't have many people that self-disclosed they were a business person or a business woman. We just didn't. So Mike O'Neill and I worked, and with local chambers, we went back out to 7 different locations, and we asked the same 3 questions. Question number 1, when you think of a successful young Kansan, can you please describe that person? And this time, in those locations, because we engaged business people, remember we were in Wichita, and the Business Alliance of Wichita helped us, Jim, you'll remember, and Kathy, you'll remember at that time. So now we had Cerner and Hallmark and Goodyear and Black & Veatch and Cargill and mom and pop shops, right? Asked the same question, and they said that. And the intensity by which they said that, you know, surprised us a little bit. But then the second, and this, of course, created the vision and kind of what we're going to look at. The second question was, what should schools do to prepare that kid you just described for their future? That was it. Third question, what should higher ed do? Those were the 3 questions. Second question, what should schools do and how should they look in order to prepare that person you just described? All right? So I want to share with you that second question. I'm going to go through this really fast because I'm going to give it to you in 3 different ways. And you've seen this. This is our researcher slide deck. I often tell people 110 slides. They're always disappointed that we've never shown all 110 slides of the research. But basically it was this. Hey, you need to go change school culture. You need to value kids not going to baccalaureate as much as you value baccalaureate kids. Come back to that. They said you need to start career planning with kids much earlier than you do today. You don't need to ask them what they want to be. You need to find out what their passions and interests are and then help make that into a career. You said somewhere along the way, we need to engage families differently and better, and engagement was the key, not communication. Engagement is the key, and I will tell you, if you talk to our redesigned schools, this is one of the things that they struggle with. They struggle with this, but it's still very important. They also said same thing with community. We have to collaborate with our community more. Nowhere is that going to be seen more than in the early childhood development things. They said maybe we ought to individualize or personalize the instruction for every kid. This is in 2015. I just want to remind you when this data was done. They said kids need real-world instruction. They need to know what it is to do real-world work, as early as maybe pre-K. They need project-based learning where they do that work. They need early childhood that the community is involved with. I'll come back to that. And then they said a whole host of minor things. I say minor because they weren't represented in big enough blocks to really talk about that. That was in 2015. That was what should schools do and what should they look like in order to deliver that successful adult. So this is the chart that we've used over and over, which summarizes that. They said Kansas kids need quality preschool, including all-day kindergarten. That's what was funded in the school finance formula. What they said about pre-K was very interesting. They said communities need to do that, preferably in the home with parents. But the community needs to decide how should that look. Is it faith-based? Is it school-based? Is it private-based? Doesn't matter. Every kid should arrive to kindergarten ready for that experience, and they are not. So get your community together and have a conversation about that. Changes need to be made in school culture. And you know, this is where all post-secondary plans matter. You want to be a diesel mechanic? Great, right? Today, we don't even think about that because Washburn Tech's going to have a big celebration on signing day. That wasn't happening in 15. Wasn't happening in 15. So you want to be a physical therapy assistant? Great. You want to be a pharmacist? Great. Your plan is your plan and how you're going to get there. But as you know, most people are going to need a plan after high school. They also said we want new roles for social workers and counselors. We want them working with kids, and we'd like to have more of them. And that's only accelerated since 15. as suicide has grown since then, and social and emotional needs are even more severe. And that's why the Kansas legislature is talking about mental health, and so is the governor. Whoops, sorry, I'm going to come back. Collaboration between schools and businesses I talked about. I'm going to skip the purple for a second because it's the most complex. And community service needs to play a bigger role in every student. Civics and giving back to others, and Don Gifford's going to talk about that with the standards today. And then they said the most complex one, you need to organize schools around kids, not around the system. Wow. Okay, that's going to be hard. We'll come back to that, but that's going to be hard, right? I mean, everyone, you know, there's a system to everything. There's an interstate commerce system. There's a system to everything. So oftentimes during that time, people would ask me, just tell me in simple terms, what does it mean to be successful in Kansas? So we took the research, and Randy, not the researchers, put it into layperson's terms. Said, what is success then as Kansas defined it? And it really was these four major domains. A successful person's happy, they have a sense of fulfillment, they give back to their communities, they're in the service of others, and they have a skill set and the student success skills that allow them to earn a living in the middle class or beyond. 3 of those 4 you cannot measure on a test. 1 is measurable on a test. And so things started to become a little bit clearer as we went through this work. Here's all the skill sets that came out of the 15 research. Interpersonal, intrapersonal, cognitive skills, all equally important in a context of putting them to work equally. Now the question was, though, that was in 15. So we've had this wheel of all those things that Kansas said back in 15 out, and we've been going out, as you know, and talking, and you've done this work, so you're included in the next piece of research. We've now asked over 9,000 Kansans this question since 15. If you had to pick only one of these skills, not fair, because they're all equally important, but if you only had to pick one, Jim, for your own kids or grandkids, which one would you want him or her to have as they became an adult? We asked 9,000 Kansans that question, and that's what they said. The bigger the word, the more responses. That's all right off the wheel. 6 people out of 9,300 and change chose content knowledge. But it was chosen 6 times. Now, all equally important, but we asked kids. We asked kids, what do you need help with on that wheel? Go back. What do you need help with of all these things? 7,300 Kansas students said this. These are things I've shared with you before. I know it's hard to believe, Dina, that a 6th grade male might say they need help in self-regulation. I know it'd be hard to believe anyone that's taught middle school. This is what they said they needed help with, that they weren't. I always say this, Steve, you know this, we've talked about this. Listen to kids, they'll tell you. They really will. They won't hold back. I mean, they'll share the good and the bad. This is what they said they needed help with. 7,300 kids, 90-some hundred adults in Kansas validating the research that was done in 15. Okay? And thus, you know, we came back. That's the vision statement. Success of each child, because all the research is pointing, I'm going to share with you, all of the research is pointing to the complexities of success as an adult is multifaceted. It's not one facet. It's a combination of skills that lead to that. You said, okay, then we need to balance out what the skill set should look like in the definition of a successful high school graduate, and you had some goals that you said we ought to go about some of these measurement, and some of these we're going to go about how we go about doing the work. That was all done, brought back out. Brad and I actually did a reunion tour where we validated, so is this what you said? Yes. But here's the really interesting part. What if Kansans got it wrong? What if, even though that's what they said they wanted, what if there's no research to support that? Right? What if there's no good peer-reviewed research to support that? Any of that work, post-secondary completion, any of that work. Well, Let's start with our infamous Georgetown Policy Institute that said by 2020, by the way, I was in Goddard and I said this at the Kansas Can conference, and I'll give all the credit to Justin Henry because Jim and I were there that evening. Do you think 2050 is a long ways away? Because when I hear that, I certainly do, until you realize it's the same length away as 1990 was. It's 30 years. That struck me that night when he said that. 2020, Georgetown said Kansas needs 71% of their graduates to have something beyond high school. They're redoing that study and should come out any month. Half of that market's baccalaureate, master's, PhDs, professional degrees like attorneys and doctors, and the other half are associate degrees and certificates. I have not seen the most recent study. There's some indication that we're moving a little bit more toward the associate degree, even as much as the certificate, but that's the data that we've been working off of. All right, and you know we've made progress. We've gone from 44, our baseline, to 48% in 2 years. 48% of Kansas kids, 4% more than when we started this journey, have now earned a high school diploma and something else. Because the something else validates that they have some skills. That's what it does. So if you earn an associate degree or baccalaureate degree or certificate in welding, you have some skill sets that help validate that. This is fairly recent research. This is actually research out of Chicago. This is the title of the article. Boosting soft skills is better than raising test scores. We don't like the word soft skills. In fact, business leaders recently said, stop using it. Call them student success skills. They're not soft at all. They're the skills that we have to have if we're going to be successful. This is a Chicago analysis. It's very interesting. It just came out in early March. All right, this is just some of the quotes from that 150,000 students in 133 Chicago public high schools where they did match pairs. They said, we're going to test prep some of them in reading and math, and we're going to focus on skills like motivation, ability to resolve conflict, perseverance, resiliency. We're going to focus on that, and then we're going to measure test scores. All right, and we're going to measure graduation rates, we're going to measure college going rates, etc. They said doing those student success skills are getting even better short-term, and they're getting better long-term results for students than schools that only focused on test prep. It's emerging research. They also said schools that develop those skills produce students with higher grades, fewer absences, fewer disciplinary problems, fewer arrest records in high school. Same research article said, later, the students that went to those high schools graduated at a higher rate and went to college at higher rates. Interesting. We may learn, don't know, that students that attend schools might end up earning more college degrees than the matched pair group. That research is still out because they're in college right now. All right, what about other research? Well, we asked business leaders, this is a national report, what skills do high school graduates, two-year college graduates, four-year college graduates ask? All right, this is again coming back to the Mike O'Neill when he was at the chamber, and we asked this, and we're looking at that, and Alan Cobb and I just been looking at that, looking at our own data. This is national data. High school graduates, business leaders say they lack these across the country. A professionalism and a work ethic. A professionalism and a work ethic. Number one skill high school graduates lack according to a corporate survey of business leaders in America. They can't do teamwork, trouble with verbal communication. All right? How about two-year colleges? So I went to Butler County, I must be better. There's the skills that are lacking. Well, but I went to a four-year college. So I don't have these lacking skills. It's not what business leaders are telling us. As I always say, if you don't like this data, go to Garden City and ask the people in Garden City. Ask the people in Chanute. Get your own data set. This is what they said nationally. By the way, I just looked at the Kansas Chamber data. They're saying the same thing from the CEOs of the. How about Harvard, Stanford, and the Carnegie? we'd think those are pretty prestigious research-based institutions. They said 85% of job success comes from having well-developed people skills, student success skills, those interpersonal skills. How about Gallup, another organization that's steeped in research? Gallup said, if you look at successful adults and then look back at school, well, you need are teachers that care a great deal. Content is not king. This is Gallup research. Teachers need to mentor. They need to be excited about kids' future, and they need to focus on their strengths, not their weaknesses. That's an IPS. They said schools need to do long-term projects. They need to have project-based learning. They have work experiences connected to learning, and they need to have deep, lasting engagement. Deep, lasting engagement. And Gallup went on to say, unfortunately, in America, very few kids get to do that every day. Only 6%, according to Gallup, get to spend time in a long-term project that takes a semester or more to complete. Think about Blue Valley CAPS, where they do that work every day. Only 30% get to do an internship or job shadowing. Only 20% are extremely involved in extracurricular activities. So we had to go out about organized schools around the kids, not around the adults, not around us, policymakers. Focus on the kids and not around the system. And you said, well, can we get some volunteers that want to try to do this? 3 years ago now, 3 years ago this spring, we announced the Mercury. They started in the fall. It'll be 3 years ago this fall. We now, as you know, have 66 school districts attempting to do this work. The early results are promising. That's all we can say, because they're early. They're promising. They all look a little different, but they're organized around 4 major themes. And look at this. Isn't it amazing? We took what Kansan said, validated by research, and we put those into action. Student success skills. All of those things on the wheel operating in the same way. We're trying to personalize the experience for every kid, exactly what Kansan said. We're trying to engage our family, our business, and our community partnerships at a different level than we ever have. And kids should apply that work in real-world projects. And when you were out at Dighton, you got to see that from a little school that's trying to do that every day. We're not perfect in this by any means, but it's happening. It's happening in Andover. It's happening in Dighton, as I mentioned. It's happening all across Kansas, and it's happening because of your direction. That work will continue. We have Apollo 2, Phase 2 in front of us. We're taking applications now. Hopefully you'll encourage some people to want to do this. As we learn, these are going to be rolled into our KISA project, and as we really move districts, and this is what we know, this is how it will look in general, and this is how we ought to go about doing it. Meanwhile, what are we measuring? Those number of kids that end up with 2 pieces of paper, a high school diploma and something else, and they seem happy, fulfilled, and they're giving back to the service of their community. Much harder to measure quantitatively, but that's what we're after. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. That was certainly a good reminder of a lot of the data we've used, but then it's interesting to see some of these new studies that really are kind of reinforcing the work that we're doing here in Kansas. So, board members, any questions of Randy at this time? Okay, Michelle? You want to use your mic, please?
Heard from a coach last week in the Blue Valley School District, and he was talking about a kid in a sport that had gone undefeated for 6 years. He was never beaten. Went to the state championship and lost for the first time. And he told him that does not define you. The thousands of hours you put into the training, all the wins you did that built you up to that level, you're going on to a college, you have a scholarship, and those are the kind of things that, you have a kid that prepares for a test, but something happens on that day, something went wrong, maybe there's something bad happened or whatever, but they had prepared for it all the hours, and maybe they didn't do so well, and again, that doesn't define the student on that test day, on that test, and that's kind of something that I was just wanting to put out there is, on that day on that test, that doesn't, as long as the kid is persevering and studying and doing all the right things and all the right things when no one's watching and being virtuous, those are the kinds of things that we need to focus on with the student and reiterate that. The teachers need to be reiterating that like he does. He's a very good speaker. He's a very good coach. He's a very good history teacher. I think those are the kind of things that I just want to make a point to bring that up, and you
Thank you.
talked
Great,
about that.
great example, Michelle. Appreciate that. Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Might you speculate on a mechanism that would be a fairly significant change to help the public become more engaged in what we're doing?
It's hard because of distraction and we're all busy, and then there's a lot of things that clamor for our attention, right? Social media. I would say, I think Michelle gave an interesting kind of anecdote of a story. I think it resonates when you say, look, what makes up success? It's a difficult thing. I still think of my 33-year-old, 27-year-old. My son just had his birthday last week, and it still moves, right? It's this combination of skills. And so I tell people we have just under 500,000 kids in accredited schools, public and private. And I think about all of them. I think about Michelle's kids, right? And I know that even within her family, her kids have different needs and strengths and weaknesses. And so it's this combination that we're trying to put together that the research isn't quite clear on, with the ratio of what makes that up. How much of it is the student success skills? How much is it academic? How much is it involvement? That is yet to be really defined clearly on the ratio, but you're looking at 7 to 8 measures, all equally important as to that success. But that doesn't mean that when Ben's in Sterling or any other school, that student needs all of them equally. Does that make sense? They need them unequally based upon what their needs are. The talented school and the talented teacher knows that student well enough to apply that with their family in order to highlight that and to encourage them. So I think when we're talking to families, it's having that conversation about what do you see, what do we see, and then develop a 6-month goal in middle school and high school, and then revisit that every 6 months so we're making progress to where that student wants to go.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. Would encourage you, and I know you will continue, keep getting that message out there. Really appreciate that. I now declare the Citizens Open Forum of the Kansas State Board of Education meeting open at 10:32. The State Board provides this opportunity for citizens to share views about topics of interest or issues currently being considered by the State Board. State Board asks that speakers identify themselves by name and the name of the group they represent, if applicable. The State Board also asks that each speaker focus their remarks on issues and topics. Personal attacks will not be tolerated. Each speaker shall be limited to 3 minutes. Any board questions will be for clarification. Our first speaker is Harteg Setai, and followed by Dave Trabert. Welcome. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Some copies of my statement here. My name is Harteg Setai. I'm from Topeka, Kansas. I'm a neurologist by profession. I have 2 children that attend schools in Topeka. Suhavi, 1st grade, and Sidik is in 4th grade. Thank you for allowing me to speak on the proposed Kansas K-12 social studies standards. I've lived in Kansas since 2011. I'm a proud member of the Sikh community and a proud citizen of Kansas. Sikhs have been an integral part of the Kansas fabric for generations. We are your doctors, your cab drivers, teachers, farmers, engineers, colleagues, neighbors, classmates. I was delighted to learn that the new draft standards which are being considered today include Sikhism, the world's 5th largest religion in the suggested instruction for middle-level geography and upper-level world history. This is a positive step in overcoming ignorance and in reducing bullying. A report by Sikh Coalition, the nation's largest Sikh civil rights organization, found that Sikh students are bullied at a rate twice the national average. largely due to their distinct identity. More inclusive and diverse standards of education will go a long way for Sikhs and other minority students that represent religious minorities in Kansas to feel more included and better understood. I hope that Kansas will join a growing list of 12 states that made their standards more accurate and inclusive, including Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Indiana, Michigan, Nebraska, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, Tennessee, and Texas. I do have Mr. and Mrs. Java, one of the Topeka's long-standing Sikh family, been here for 30 plus years. Mr. Java has also authored some books about Sikhism and how they weave together with the American society and American tenets. Some free copies of those books are on the table. Please feel free to grab one. I will take any questions if you guys have any. That's all.
Thank you very much. Jean and Ben, were you up from before? Okay, thank you. Any questions? Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. Apparently, we're going to go over my talking points from 3 years ago briefly today. One of those talking points, as I recall, is to sing Christmas carols. And a very quick story. I'm an Uber driver. I had a woman in my car coming back from Florida. She lives in Florida. She was back for her 50th high school reunion at Wyandotte High School, and she's a Buddhist. And we're talking about, all sorts of things, how to raise kids well and how to make life better. And I told her that one of my talking points is to sing Christmas carols. Oh, I just love Christmas carols, she said. And I thought this is pretty good coming from a Buddhist. I think the second part of that is we should never discount non-Christian poems or songs. Would this be something that you could support, that we sing Christmas carols as well as embrace our pluralism?
Well, my kids sing them all the time. I can't speak for all Sikhs, but from the way I see it is, it's part of the culture of growing up here, and I've been here long enough to be acculturated to that. So I see that as part of the culture. I don't see any problems with something like that. Of course.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Dave Trabert and then Phyllis Farrar.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dave Trabert. I'm the CEO at Kansas Policy Institute from Overland Park. I'm here to share the results of our third annual A through F grading project for public schools, in which we translate state assessment scores into labels that are easy for everyone to understand. Instead of levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, we use labels everyone understands, A, B, C, D, and F. And all we do is translate those state scores using the State Board of Education and Department of Education's cut scores and definitions to, so for example, students scoring in level 4 on the state assessment are considered to have excellent understanding of material and be on track for college and career. So we give that an A. Students in level 3 have an effective understanding and are on track. So we give that a B. Of course, there's 5 letter grades and 4 levels, so we split level 2, which is having a basic understanding, but still needing some remedial training, not on track. We take the top half as a C and the bottom half as a D, and then level 1, which is below grade level with limited understanding, we assign an F to that. And so the results for this year for the 1,275 public schools that had reportable data show that there were no A's. There was 11% of buildings received a B, 56% a C, 30% a D, and only 3% an F. That's pretty much the same as it was last year. This year we added 2 new elements. One is to include the private schools that also take the state assessment, and we added the new spending at the building level that we get from the Department of Education. And the building level spending does not include the debt spending or the capital outlay and central office administration. The private schools results also no A's, 48% B, 42% C, 7% D, and 3% F. There's an example in my handout of some of the comparison of scores, which is really interesting when you compare the letter grade scores and the GPAs with the building spending. And so, for example, you see Shawnee Mission East and Blue Valley Southwest both earned a C, but Blue Valley Southwest spent 20% more per pupil. And so this, again, shows us time and time again that there really is no relationship between the amount of money spent and the achievement that's received, whether it's at the building level, the district level, the state level, whatever. You'll receive hard copies of the report in the mail soon. Our printer got a little bit behind. We're keeping him busy. But we just wanted to share that with you and be happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you. Steve Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Dave, very much. This amount per pupil is all in, right? It's basically all in, even paying for skylights and paving the parking lot, right?
It's all in, and this, again, we get this from the Department of Education, is what they shared. We didn't do the calculation. They actually sent us the amount per pupil. They said it's, and this is what's required in the federal Every Student Succeeds Act. It does not include anything for capital outlay, for debt payments, or for central office administration, but it would be everything else.
Okay, because that, if we did include everything, these numbers tend to be more like 15,000 per year across the country.
They would be higher.
Right. Is there a way to get an easy to read breakdown of the money that goes to the classroom? Are we able to get that? Just the classroom dollars per pupil?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's sort of. There's not an official definition of classroom. There is an official definition of instruction. And that's a definition that the State Department uses, as well as, and it comes from the federal department. That's basically, I think, the definition that accounts for direct interaction between students and teachers. So it includes teachers, the teachers' aides, materials, and so forth. And we can get that allocation. And that is about 53% on average in the state of Kansas. That's count. Now that is counting all spending, including debt and everything else.
Oh, okay.
And that number has been relatively consistent over the last 15 years.
I think, speaking
Steve,
for...
that's two questions.
Thank
Sorry.
you, Madam Chair. All right. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Kathy,
Yes, Ann.
I had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Dave, for being here today. My question is a follow-up basically on what Commissioner Watson was telling us, that Kansans and Kansas business people and all the research says that what you measure on your scale is only 15 to 20% of what makes a successful student. Does your organization have plans to rate schools on the other 80% of what's important?
Of course, that's a great question, Commissioner. The survey information is just the survey information. We are rating this on state assessment scores and will continue to rate it just on state assessment scores for one big reason. When the school districts decided to sue the state of Kansas, saying they did not have enough funding, the court said that it was convinced that schools didn't have enough funding because a large percentage of kids were below grade level on the state assessment. And so it is incumbent upon all of us to understand whether we're making progress on getting kids above grade level. And so we'll continue to do the A through F grading on the state assessment scores.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think it's important for when you present these to school districts to let them know you're tracking results related to the court order and not what they think make kids successful. But thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Phyllis Farrar.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Phyllis Farrer, and I'm here representing world language teachers in Kansas in response to a recommendation that the board adopted a month ago concerning computer science standards requirements. In my reading of the proposal, and I believe the chair of the commission said this is a good place to start discussions, so I'm here to add to the initial discussions about computer science standards recommendations. There's very confusing terminology in the proposal. So the first sentence is probably what caught my attention the most, and that is that the State Board of Education gave unanimous approval to recommendations that would allow computer science classes fulfill requirements for a core course of math, science, or foreign language for graduation. So the first sentence is talking about graduation requirements. The task force recommendations that were listed later are all about supporting computer science education. I have no trouble with those recommendations. The importance of computer skills in this day and age is unquestionable. However, replacing or saying that graduation requirements can be interchangeable or replacing each other in this context is a little bit misleading. First of all, the term core subject isn't used in defining Kansas graduation requirements. If you look at your the responsibility of the board for setting graduation requirements, the documents don't talk about core subjects. They talk about units of graduation. Language, world languages is never listed as a core subject. So replacing world language unit is it's illogical. First of all, languages are not mentioned as a graduation requirement in Kansas. I would argue that they should be, but since they are not a requirement, it is illogical to define computer science as being able to replace something that is not a core requirement, if that makes sense. So I would caution as this conversation goes forward, when you talk about the need of computer science, it could be called a computer language, it can be called a computer science. It's neither a language nor a science, it's a technical skill that's necessary, and we shouldn't confuse it. We wouldn't want to say take a year out of a pathway, CTE pathway, and do something else. We wouldn't want to say take a year out of science courses and do something else and still call them science. So it doesn't work with languages either.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
State Board Citizens Open Forum is closed at 10:48. We'd like to thank our speakers for sharing their views with the board. The State Board will determine if any issues should be addressed as an agenda item at a future meeting. Thank you very much. Okay, our first agenda item is to act on history, government, and social studies standards. So Don Gifford's here, and I believe you have a clip, and plus somebody else may be here today.
Yeah, actually, we were supposed to have Nate McAllister here. You had asked for a practitioner, and I picked some of the rock star practitioners. Nate McAllister suffered a tragic loss last night and his family, and so he's not able to make it today. He was going to come in on spring break to actually make this presentation. So I do have with me today, though, Tina Ellsworth, Dr. Tina Ellsworth. who was with us last month, Dr. Jeannie Disney, and Glenn Wiebe, who's back there in the back. And they were our co-chairs for on the committee. So if you have questions of them, you might be able to ask them later. So I have a video from Ashley Humphrey. Ashley was the 2019 Kansas Social Studies Teacher of the Year. And she's actually in school this week, so she actually couldn't get away. But she was able to make this video, and so I think we've got all the technical issues dealt with, so let's see.
Hi, so my name is Ashley Humphrey, and I teach 6th grade social studies in Olathe, Kansas, and this is my 14th year of teaching. Don Gifford asked me to just briefly share how I use the Kansas History, Government, and Social Studies standards in my classroom. I was very honored to receive the Kansas Social Studies Teacher of the Year Award for 2019. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of share some brief examples of how I use the standards and implement them in my classroom. So I know this is kind of a busy screen. I've got a lot going on, but this is my classroom syllabus that I give out to students and parents. And I really wouldn't say I incorporate the standards into my classroom. It's really embedded in everything that I do because I view the standards are my curriculum, and that's how I implement the teaching of history, even though my content area is ancient history. So I let my students and parents know upfront that I am grading for mastery based on the standards. Let them know the standards upfront. And I talk to them about how I'm going to be measuring students on mastery of the standards. So for every standard and assignment that I give, I have a scale of mastery 1 to 10, letting them know how well they've mastered that standard. And then I also provide them the opportunity to see what those standards look like. So for your viewing purposes, I've shown you how I've taken all the standards and benchmarks and broken them down into student-friendly language. And so I tag all of my assignments in my gradebook with these, and students are also aware of the standard for every assignment that they do. Starting off with helping them identify the benchmark verbs. So what does recognizing look like? And I'll be showing you some examples here in my presentation of when we are using benchmark 1 and talking about recognizing. We're going to be finding text evidence. When we get to benchmark 2 and we're analyzing, we're going to be using our historical thinking skills. Sometimes these are in the form of a document-based question. When we get to standard 3 and we're investigating, we're going to be doing more critical thinking. Oftentimes I'm incorporating contemporary issues here. And then standard 4, where we're really constructing arguments using claim and evidence. And we do a lot of writing and also incorporating primary sources here as well. One of the things I like to start off with at the beginning of the year is helping my students. Right away, I talk to them. Can't find it just for fun. I have a little magnifying glass. Can't find it. I talk to them about how I want them to view history through the lens of our standards. So I actually have these little colored magnifying glasses that I hand out to students. And we start out by breaking down the difficult vocabulary in our standards, not the benchmarks yet, just the major standards. We talk about what consequences are and rights, responsibilities, what a society means, what diversity, continuity, and what the word dynamic means. And then we practice this right away. And these are something that the students keep in their spirals right up front all year long. We refer back to them. So all of my students could call off all these standards and be able to explain what they mean. So that's really right away at the beginning of the year. Some other ways that we practice this, here's going to go through them. We talk about the definitions. We come up with some short ways to explain what these keywords mean, and then they keep this on hand as well. Some fun ways I try to make this applicable right away at the beginning of the year. Throughout the year, we analyze primary sources and artwork, but trying to capture their attention right away. One thing I do is I give them this photograph, and students have different colored lenses. So when they're looking at this picture from the Lorax, they have to talk about what are choices and consequences happening in this picture? What are the rights and responsibilities? Right away, students have really great conversations, and helping them see that our standards aren't something that's a daunting task. It's something that's embedded in everything we do. It's embedded in our conversations and how we teach and how we explain our thinking. Another way that I introduce the standards to my students at the beginning of the year is with a video clip. We watch this clip from the movie Brave. And every time we watch it, the students are looking for a different standard. And it's really eye-opening for them to think that I can look at the same video, or in the future, I can look at the same historical event and I can find different examples of the standard. I can find examples of choices and consequences, or the individuals having rights and responsibilities. And so every time they view the video clip, they see something different. Again, just training them to think through the lens of a standard is how I start off the year right away. Kind of breaking down a few more elements of how I'm incorporating the standards as the year goes on, and students are building up their historical thinking skills. Something that we work a lot on is annotating text or looking for text evidence. So whenever I'm posing a question for students to look for to guide their thinking when they read, for example, up here, I always tie it to a benchmark so that they know it's measurable for them, so they know how I'm grading them on mastery. But for example, what dynamic environmental choices did people make during the New Stone Age? Sometimes I have to put it in other words, or they go back to their vocabulary list at the beginning of the year. But this guides their thinking. So as they're reading the textbook pages, they're not necessarily just taking notes. They are reading through the lens of standard 5.1, benchmark 1. I give them a little example up front. Here is a paragraph or a sentence that I would highlight. Here's what I mean. And they learn how to explain their thinking of those benchmarks in their own words. And then so that's their learning target, and I grade them on mastery for that. And they can always redo their work so they can improve on building their mastery of our standards. Another way that students track their own learning and mastery of our standards is on any unit test that I'm going to give. I give a pre-test and a post-test. Every question is tagged to a standard and a benchmark. Right up front, the students know they take their test. Our Olathe district uses a resource called Mastery Connect, which is really heavily focused on standards for every content area across the district. And so I really love that feature. But so our students are used to that. So they record their score and they know right away on their pretest which standards they need to really focus on. And then they can compare that to their post-test score. So I like to break down the questions on our tests so that they match the standards too. And then, like I mentioned earlier, we as students build up their stamina for critical thinking, we work our way into the higher level benchmarks. And that's one thing I love about our standards in social studies. Having 5 standards, it's very simple, but each one is broken down into 4 benchmarks, and those benchmarks build upon depth of knowledge and rigor. So once students are comfortable with the skills of recognizing and analyzing, then we move into investigating, and I'm able to pull in contemporary issues, current events. Even though I teach ancient history, I'm able to connect the past to the present and pulling up some contemporary issues in those regions today. And then ultimately we do a lot of writing in social studies. And so standard 4 is about constructing evidence with constructing an argument with claim and evidence, and they're able to go back into the text. So this is at the 6th grade level. I have my expectations are very high for students, but using great student engagement strategies, they buy into that. I'm super impressed with their skill level. And I can sit down with parents at conferences and I can pinpoint which standards and which benchmarks that students really need to improve on. And again, because I am doing standards-based grading, they are able to go back and redo and master all the standards and benchmarks by the end of the year. Here's a few pictures of some student work. Here is just started off the other day in teaching ancient China with a painting. I love to use paintings as primary sources and having students analyze them. But again, I phrase it with the benchmarks from our standards. What are some examples of dynamic relationships that they see? They have great conversations. Something I did kind of a detour from the curriculum right after the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. I decided to come back and I thought, let's take a look at Super Bowl history. And I had lots of current event articles, and I wanted the students to focus on what are examples of continuity and change that you see in NFL history. And so here's a student artwork. They were doing a strategy called sketch notes or sketch to stretch. And students are connecting things that have changed over time and things that have stayed the same over time with Super Bowl. So that made it really relevant. Other just strategies students are using, reflecting on sources, analyzing. But like I said, all of them are learning to think through the lens of our standards. They're written so that the learning targets are measurable for them and they can track their progress. So I am super proud of the work that we've done in Kansas on our standards. I think they are phenomenal, and it makes teaching history so valuable and relevant in students' lives. So thank you for your time.
All right, so you can see that maybe Ashley is really good at what she does.
But Don, that's very for me anyway, that's very helpful to see an example of a practitioner and how they use the standards to drive their instruction.
Yeah, so we had planned to have Nate McAllister here. I'm just putting up his credentials. An unbelievable rock star kind of guy, and our thoughts and prayers go out to that family as they suffer a tragic loss. So I think that's it for me. Any questions of myself or Dr. Ellsworth, Dr. Disney, or Glenn?
Board members, any questions on the history, government, social studies standards? Michelle, are you ready for a motion?
I'd just like to make a comment.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Don. I know we had a long conversation yesterday on this. I guess my biggest thing is, and even listening to her and kind of putting the history and social studies together, my biggest concern was when they talked about and I still have this concern even after we talked yesterday, is the rights. When they talk about it's on the website, and then when you go to other websites and look up the standards in Kansas, now they always say over and over again that it's not mandated from the state. But I just want to make this point that rights are not something that society gives you. Those would be privileges like driving the car. Rights are unalienable rights, and they pre-existed a government. This reference makes it sound like the rights in here makes it sound like our rights are dependent on what the collective majority directs, and our rights come from the law of, but our rights come from the law of nature. And our duty, responsibility is to exercise those rights. Our government's highest duty is to protect those rights. So I really want to make sure that we're conveying from the state board, or do we want to convey the curriculum standards based on they can't be mandated, or they're not mandated, is to know that the social studies standards that include the history are sending the wrong message. I just want to make sure that, because that's where I'm reading that, and I read it when I go out and beyond the Kansas State Board of Education, and I'm looking at what the standards are in all 50 states, and I just want to make sure that it just sounds like you don't have to exercise those rights, and I feel like if we're teaching virtue or a virtuous student, and we're teaching that at a young age, and it should be almost like 7 times 7, and they need to know that they need to do the right thing with law when no one's watching. They need to be following the law, and that's where we're coming out with successful students and making sure that whether we're preparing food, we're a scientist working on stem cells, whatever it is, we're being virtuous. We're not doing something that we're not supposed to be doing while no one else is watching. So
that's correct. But I think the reference you were talking about really is about the exercise of rights, not responsibility. So responsibilities, we have a lot of responsibilities, but the exercise of rights is something we can choose not to do.
Like we talked about the gun. You don't have to own a gun or buy a gun, but you have to protect those rights, and the government needs to protect those rights from others to be able to bear arms. Right. So I just want to make sure that it just seemed like it was it's more like the social studies teacher is teaching whatever. It's kind of like what society or whatever and I feel like we need to focus on the inalienable rights, and that needs to be done primary school all the way through middle school, all the way through the high school. And then
if you look at the 5th grade course, the 5th grade and then the American government course, I think you see that pretty clearly demonstrated in those things.
And after talking with the curriculum coach, which they have those in Blue Valley, they don't have those in every single school. They have that. We have the ability to teach more of those courses in American World, and my son's, a good product of that, and learning that and having that ability. I just want to make sure that all children are getting that, and throughout the state of Kansas.
Steve Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to pick up perhaps on what Michelle is talking about. Being part of the moonshot, I like to quote President Kennedy. In fact, my parents, I would describe my late parents as Kennedy Democrats. And in his inaugural, he not only said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. We've all heard that. But when I was in my 30s, I went back and read his inaugural address. And he reminded us that our rights do not come from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. And I'm wondering if, in our discussion of rights and responsibilities, if this hasn't to some degree, and I respect your opinion on this wholeheartedly, Don, if that hasn't been lost to some extent.
Oh, I think from a historical point of view, I think that things that the founders viewed as our inalienable rights have definitely been expanded on by government over the course of generation upon generation. Who's to say, right? But the argument then is we live in a democratic republic, so we have a system, and that system is supported by these three branches. So, and ultimately, the people. Mm-hmm.
Jim McNeese.
Don, I like the way the standards are brought forward. They engage the teachers in a way that makes it instructionally friendly. So I really applaud how you've organized it and how the team has worked together to do that.
Thank you. The committee's great to work with, and these co-chairs were tremendous academic leaders. So.
I'm thinking as a history teacher from the 1970s, this stuff never crossed our path, and I really like what you've done. So in saying that, I move that the Kansas State Board of Education approve the proposed history and government and social studies standards.
Okay, we have a motion for approval of the standards. Do we have a second? Ben Jones. Any further discussion? If not, it's time for vote. All in approval of the motion, please raise your hand. Ann, are you on?
Yes, I vote aye.
Okay. All opposed? Okay, 8-2. Dawn, thank you very much. And again, thank your teacher who presented via a video clip, and our condolences to the other gentleman who was not able to make it today. Thank you very much. Okay, at this time, we're going to receive some recommendations from the e-cigarette and vaping task force. So Mark is up, and there's Jordan also. So welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioner Watson, and board members. We'll pull up the PowerPoint, and then Jordan's going to pull up a website that she'll be.
I can do it whenever I come up.
Okay. Yeah. So you should be receiving a 4-page document on the Kansas e-cigarette vaping task force draft disciplinary recommendations. And I will say that we initially had targeted January as being the date, the month that we were going to present these. We quickly discovered that this was going to be a more involved lift than what we originally anticipated. So we appreciate your patience with us in being able to bring these forward this month. Want to talk about this first factor that was considered when we were looking at the development of these recommendations, and that is the understanding that e-cigarettes or vaping is different than cigarette use, and consequently needs to be addressed differently. That because of, and you've heard us talk about this for a number of months now, about the unique challenges of e-cigarettes, the high level of dependency, the ability for the use to be kind of hidden, all of these things, and also the commercial aspect, that we can't simply equate e-cigarettes or vaping to cigarettes and how we've always handled that in schools. And so we wanted to make sure that we recognize that this is unique and going to take a different approach. The task force made it clear that they wanted education to be a component of the discipline best practices. We looked at a number of sources, including the Public Health Law Center that has established some great guidance on e-cigarette use policies as well as disciplinary practices, and they also echoed the idea that education needed to be a component. We also wanted to present a tiered approach where the consequences would increase as subsequent violations would take place. And finally, wanted to know that administrators are encouraged to, that this needed to be personalized, where a administrator who is at a rural Southwest school or a urban Eastern Kansas school, that they needed to be able to select and administer discipline consequences that were most appropriate for their given situation. In terms of how we would like to, how the task force envisions these recommendations being applied, as you will read through them, you will see the use of the term "and" quite a bit to reflect that we believe that these consequences need to be in combination, that they work best when there is a combination of a consequence such as the confiscation of the materials, as well as an educational piece, as well as kind of the involvement of parents. So we're looking at them being in combination. The severity of the offense should be considered as a factor in the application of disciplinary consequence. In other words, if you have someone who is simply caught vaping in the bathroom as their first offense, that's the first time that they've ever been caught, as opposed to somebody who is caught selling the product in the bathroom, that you should look at those in separately and say, well, okay, the actual selling of a product probably rates as a higher level of offense than the first one. So wanted to bring that in as a factor. That the focus of the discipline ultimately is what's in the best interest of the student, that we want to be able to apply discipline that is meaningful to the student, that will have an impact on them, and ideally lead them away from either using, distributing, or being involved with e-cigarettes. And we also included resources both for tobacco education programs and cessation programs at the end of the document, because we wanted to, and this was one of the pieces that took us some time, because we didn't want to hand out recommendations on this is what you need to do, but not provide resources that would allow schools to follow up on either educating students or directing them toward cessation opportunities. So the first offense recommendation, so the student who is found using the first time around, this is what the task force has recommended, that with the confiscation of the tobacco products, tobacco-related devices, imitation tobacco products, or lighters, basically so that it can be applied to any number of products, and the notification of parents and or guardians, and notification of law enforcement as appropriate. Because again, depending on kind of the statement that the school wants to make, and what their how severe they wanted to address it, and given them some flexibility here. The third one, meeting with or receiving information from school staff, such as a counselor, health educator, school nurse, to learn about facts and dangers of use. This is the education component. So the first offense, we want to make sure that the student starts to receive educational information so they can make an informed decision about their behaviors. And the additional option, so this is something that the task force thinks that schools should consider with the first offense, is 1 or 2 days of in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension to include participation in a tobacco education program. In other words, giving them an option for what one or both of those days might involve would be a student who is serving an in-school suspension, that they start completing a tobacco education program. And there are education programs that do offer a certificate upon completion, so that we would have some way of monitoring that, and provision of information to the student about available cessation programs and resources. Moving on to the second offense recommendations. I'll let you read through those, but I'll point out the differences is that the first one suggested notification of parents. On this one, it would involve a meeting with the parents, not just a notification, but we're asking you to come in and we want to meet face to face. The second difference is rather than is the provision of information to the student about available cessation programs. That wasn't included in the first set of recommendations, other than if well, it wasn't included in the first one. The third aspect is an increase in the duration of the suspension. The first set of recommendations said 1 to 2 days. Now we're up to 2 to 3 days of suspension. And finally, the last part is under that additional option where we start introducing the term student not in good standing, where they would not be allowed to participate in or attend school-related extracurricular activities. Brent Unruh is with the Kansas State High School Athletics Association, and he serves as a member on our task force, and we used him as a guide with this, also in consultation with several of our school administrators. One thing that I do want to point out is that when you're seeing the 1 or 2 days of in-school suspension or 2 to 3 days of in-school suspension, this is minor compared to what some schools are doing with first or second offense. The third offense recommendations, the differences is that at this point we are starting to involve school nurses, social workers, counselors in the meetings with the student and parent. Again, the duration of the suspension is increased to 3 to 5 days. And we are, at this point, the student would be required to participate in a cessation program. The programs that are included in the document include Aspire, which was developed by MD Anderson, In Depth, which was developed by the American Lung Association, Taking Down Tobacco, which was developed through a collaboration of the Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids and the CVS Health Foundation. Tobacco Prevention Toolkit was created by Stanford Medicine, and Know the Risks, a youth guide to e-cigarettes, was developed by CDC's Office of Smoking and Health. Those are all listed and briefly described in the document. And then finally on cessation program and resources, We have My Life, My Quit, which we just found out about recently. The NOT, Not on Tobacco, which was developed by the American Lung Association. And This is Quitting, which is developed by the Truth Initiative. And the Truth Initiative is really kind of they're a leader in really addressing tobacco cessation, vaping, education from what really is effective for youth. So that is hopefully explains the document. And if you have questions, and if Jordan wants to step up and add anything.
Okay, board members, questions regarding these recommendations? Mr. Jones.
That's just clarification on how they will be applied. This is just a guidance document, but not necessarily a hard and fast rule statewide, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. That way, when I talk to superintendents and people about it, that way I phrase it the right way. Thank you.
Yeah, and we with this document, what we really tried to use the narrative for is we start off with the following our best practices, and we talk about that the second sentence in the second paragraph, administrators are encouraged to consider the severity. We keep layering in, hopefully, guidance that this is not required. These are best practice guidelines, but we trust you to determine how and in what severity to apply them.
Yeah, I know talking to smaller districts, for ease of use and policy, they just lumped it in with the cigarette policy, made that the uniform policy. I know you just said, well, let's not do it, but sometimes for practicality, the small schools, it's just easier and easier to enforce, and they know the consequences right off the bat.
Yeah, and I know some schools have just incorporated e-cigarette violations into their drug and alcohol policy as well, which kind of is similar to this.
Steve Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Several months ago, I suggested maybe we look at suggesting to local school districts that we treat it the same as alcohol. I believe Mrs. Waugh suggested that as well. Thank you, Janet. I think that's a good idea. My question to you is probably for Jordan, because you're young and vivacious and you understand social media and all sorts of things that this old decrepit guy doesn't. He said sweetly. But I went to, it was the truth one. This is quitting. And it had, are you familiar with this? The This is Quitting thing?
Yeah.
And it had I just had it here a minute ago, a fact like every 6 seconds somebody dies from smoking, the effects of smoking. And then it had reaction. The student presumably can click on one reaction. What does that do? Do you know what that does? What clicking on that reaction does in the system?
Well, it's engaging the person into their, user, and it's also kind of counting how many kids have actually responded to it and stuff, and just getting engaged, so kind of getting a feel for that. But is your question more of like the scare tactic kind
No,
of
I just
thing?
don't know what it does. Well,
Yeah.
so
I think it's just to involve users who come onto the page and get them engaged into the content that they have on that website.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Jean Clifford.
I just had a quick question. So possession of a cigarette lighter alone, is that
Violation of the policy
violation?
of a comprehensive tobacco-free policy, yes.
And
For students and staff.
again, kind of along the lines of what Ben was alluding to, is that if schools are looking specifically, schools obviously have policies in place for how to discipline regarding tobacco. This would not necessarily take the place of that. This is intended to address the unique challenges that are faced with e-cigarettes. However, if they just simply wanted to adopt this as how they would address either cigarettes or e-cigarettes, again, that's up to to the district.
Janet Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all so much for this. I think this is very exciting and crucial. My question is, have you seen any recent data on whether this is continuing to increase, or have some of these efforts, because I know a lot of states are doing it, a lot of organizations are doing it. Have you seen any data?
So the most recent data that we would have would be from 2019, and we just got that at the beginning of the year, and it's the same for national data too. But other states also take the YRBS, and we're seeing that like our neighboring states like Nebraska and Missouri, and they're also increasing as well. So with the only data we have is from 2019, but it has increased significantly from 2015, 2017, and so on.
Well, at least we're trying. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Jim McNeese.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just for a point of clarification to start, once you're suspended from school, 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, you're not in good standing. You're not in athletics. You're not participating in activities. I mean, you're almost you're almost saying that if you get suspended, you can still play. You participate. So I'd be careful of that.
So you think that we should incorporate the
Once you say you're suspended for a
on the
day,
first-
in school, out of
for the
school,
first offense?
yeah, if you say you're going to be suspended, you're not in good standing.
Okay.
Okay, it's just like automatic.
Yeah, and we can easily
Yeah.
add that.
Now,
too.
that said, suspensions are a way to catch people's attention. It's a fine. It's a penalty. But typically, as we learned with smoking and other items during the year, suspension doesn't necessarily change behavior. It drives it more underground. The counseling and support systems that are there are sometimes more of a threat to the students. Well, I've got to go to this class and talk. They're going to talk to me. Is way more dangerous. Plus, when students are suspended and they're out of school or out of the classroom, no good happens there. And I know that if the thousands of students I suspended in 29 years are listening to this, they're saying, what do you, I just never saw suspension as really solving the problem. It is a tool, and I realize that these are guidelines to help students, but cessation and interventions and support and counseling are way better than just throwing them out of school and getting them out of activities. There can be greater consequences from your coach or your drama teacher than there can be from even your parents for these. So,
Yeah, and if I could
if
address
we could do that, if we could just make that more of a focus than suspension. Though I understand that for the average person out there, suspension is like the worst thing that can happen, when really it's not.
Yeah.
And it does no good in the classroom and academic standing.
Yeah. And one of the things we tried to do was with the inclusion of the student involved, using part of their suspension time to complete an education program. We're trying to, that was recognizing just what you said and actually trying to give them something productive during that time. One of the challenges, and you obviously know much better than I do, is that the resources for being able to have an on-site counselor or an on-site school nurse even, and be able to pull them into that conversation and have that meeting just puts a strain on the school. And not all schools have someone at the ready. So that's kind of why we tried to offer a buffet.
Jim Porter.
I really like the fact that you use the word in good standing, because depending on pressures in different schools, they're going to interpret that differently. I'm always concerned with out-of-school suspension, because and I would hope that they would spend that more time doing the education process or our cessation process, because out-of-school suspension gives you more time to smoke. unsupervised.
Yeah.
And so I would hope that we would emphasize the other, but I do know that, that requiring, I'm glad you put, the issue of participation in activities, because that's a major encouragement to participate, and schools will interpret that differently. So not all of them are going to call you out of compliance just because you were suspended. When you come back, you're okay, and so that's a good emphasis. Thank you.
And the best practice would be to not suspend kids out of school. But what we found in our conversations with the task force is that's not possible to tell Kansas schools that they, to move away from that right now. And so that's kind of why we keep that an option. Right. But it's not best practice. But that is just kind of, we really got pushback on that. And so to make it work and trying to create something that works for all Kansas schools was also a challenge as well, because some schools don't have the opportunity to do in-school suspension because they don't have enough staff or do counseling with school nurses and counselors and things like that. So, but you guys, if you guys wanted to recommend to us that we take out of-school suspension, we can. That's why we came here to you with everything, and it's up to you guys to decide if that's something that you would want to provide guidance to your schools for. So,
I just want to kind of add my concern, particularly on first offense for out-of-school suspension, and the educational piece to me would be really critical. I just kind of have a concern with that. I also realize, and I want the public to realize and our schools to realize, these are recommendations. This is a guidance document. I don't want somebody to think, okay, well, the state board said on the first offense, I have to do number 2 and 2, 3, and 4. I don't want them to get the idea that this is a checklist, that they need to go down. These are recommendations. As usual, we want them to use their judgment based on the individual circumstance. We know that they're always different. And I too like the idea of not in good standing, because different schools have a little bit different way they deal with that. So I think that's a good piece. This is a receive item today. Is that correct, Peggy? So we will bring this back next month for action.
Can I follow up on
Yes, please.
That? One of the points of discussion among the task force was the use of the term and. Again, no, we don't want this to look like a checklist. That would your guidance be to remove the term and?
No, I'm okay with the term and. I think that sometimes maybe and or would be appropriate, but I think your group needs to go back and kind of listen to our feedback and our suggestions and maybe kind of do a few revisions.
Okay.
That's what I would think would be appropriate before you bring them back next month.
yeah. And I just wanted to add one update. KDHE is writing our 5-year tobacco grant right now. And the CDC is very much putting an emphasis on youth prevention and partnering with school partners and educating parents, teachers, all of that stuff. So that's something that we're writing into our grant. And I've contacted the School Nurse Association of Kansas, counselors, social workers. And so we're definitely, and thinking about the future of the task force, I have some plans for the future of the task force moving forward. Getting those, first line of defense people equipped with the information and knowledge needed to deal with those who are addicted, and screening and things like that. So I just wanted to let you guys know about that.
Great idea. Okay.
And,
okay. We'll do Ann and then Michelle. Go ahead, Ann.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted, hang on a second. Get you off speaker. Do we have any data on the cessation programs that are listed there, that they work or what their history is? And does our task force plan to do any more work on cessation?
Yes, we definitely plan to do more work on cessation. And the cessation programs recommended are evidence-based as well. Okay. And I don't know that we've updated everybody about the My Life, My Quit
no
stuff.
No, that was very recent?
Yeah, so KDHE just, we have a Kansas Quit line that we have a vendor for, and we just updated vendors. And our new vendor, National Jewish Health, has an option of a youth cessation program. So it's a text to quit, calling. These are youth trained counselors to help youth who call the quit line, and not only call, but text and also online options. So that maybe that's something we can really formally update you with at the next meeting, and we can also send you some information on it as well. But we have something in Kansas that's branded for our kids as well.
That sounds promising. Michelle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Mark, we had talked about coaches being, because of mentorship, so that the students that were addicted quickly on this, because you can control how much nicotine you're getting, which is more severe than in a cigarette. We had talked about coaches maybe being mentors, because most schools have at least one coach, and they usually have a basis on health. They'll be able to watch kids. I mean, as far as even PE class, if they can't complete something that they're normally able to, I mean, you can see those results right away, and they can be cued to that. So as far as the student that was addicted and was addicted rather quickly, his biggest support system was a buddy. He had to have someone that held him accountable and somebody to talk to and work through it. And so that's, as far as cessation, that was the biggest thing, is he had to have at least one person that could help him through that, because he went through the depression, went through the withdrawals, everything. So it needs to be maybe someone, you talked about educator here, but maybe we could reference possibly coach or PE teacher or something like that, because they're going to have that training on health as well.
Well, and I was just, in preparing for this, I was reading through the recommendations, and we talked about school nurses and social workers. But I was struck by the fact that we didn't include counselors in that. And so I think that we need to expand that list, and, as you mentioned, include other personnel, especially such as coaches, who are in such a critical role that can have a significant influence over at least a portion of the student body.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. And Jim, Jim Porter has an.
Okay.
Let's do that, and then we'll do that, Mark.
Okay.
Just one comment. I would like to ask that the issue of out-of-school suspension be reconsidered.
Okay.
I worked in both very small and moderate-sized schools, and I don't buy the argument that you can't do it.
Okay.
We had intended on sharing another document that the Department of Health and Environment had developed on youth vaping and mental health in Kansas. We did not bring copies of that, but you will receive that through Peggy. We'll get it to you, and we'll just get that to you.
Great. Well, thanks to the group for working on this. I know this discipline piece was a little probably tough to get through.
Yeah.
But board, thank you also for your feedback. Hopefully we've been able to provide you a little bit of guidance, and then we'll see you again next month.
Okay.
Now, board, we're running a little late, but I think probably everybody would like a quick break. So we've got the Milken Award winner next, but let's take a quick break and just get back as quickly as we can. Thank you. Board members, we're going to come back, but right now our sound has to be rebooted. So you get Kathy's cafeteria voice now. So, okay, our next agenda item today, and as we all love these agenda items when we get to recognize our teachers and our students, and this is no exception today. A Milken Award winner, and Dale is here.
Dale, it's down.
Down?
I know it's down.
Okay, Dale is here to introduce us today to our.
Boy, you are in luck, Madam Chairman. This
Boy,
is
we
as
are.
good as it gets. In this board meeting,
Boy,
this is as good as it gets, except, of course, Randy's speech will be better.
Of course.
I'll let you decide that. But anyway, it is good. Carla Bowden, she's a 7th grade math teacher at Andover Central Middle School. And she was a 2017 Horizon Award winner. And this Milken Awards system is different than most. It operates on the business model, Michelle, so when you're great, you get paid. So, and we don't do that in education very much. And so this is really special, and they'll give you a speech on that about that they believe how important that is, that great teachers be recognized. And Carla, it was interesting when Randy and I and Denise crew went down to this. Come on up here, Carla. What did you think we were doing? We just tell them we don't care what you tell them, just don't tell them the truth. What do you think we was doing?
I had no idea. We thought it was a redesign, something. But then a lot of us were like, they don't do this.
So anyway, we appreciate it, and she will receive a number of friends, we understand, picked up when they found out she's going to get a check for $25,000, and it will be for $25,000. And for a beginning teacher, that's kind of big. It's awesome, yeah. All right, Carla, we're glad you're here, and thank you. Okay.
Good morning. Thank you guys for having me. I do teach 7th grade math at Andover Central Middle School, and so I'm just going to give you a little tidbit about what we do in our classroom and kind of give you just a little taste of it. There's kind of three main components that I would say you would see if you were to come into our classroom. First being building a positive classroom culture, second, experiential learning, and then last, global connections. So as educators, we know how important it is for us to build positive relationships with our students. And so I do this through STEM activities on the first day of school. So when my students enter the classroom, this is the first thing they're seeing on the first day of school. They don't have to know anything about electricity since we are a math classroom, but I'm trying to create an environment that makes them uncomfortable, which sounds a little interesting on the first day of school. But they see these circuit boards, these batteries, and these alligator clips, and I want them to turn all 3 light bulbs on using the switch. And really what I'm doing as the facilitator in the room is I'm just walking around and I'm collecting data on my students. So who are the students that wanted to work by themselves? Who are the ones that wanted a partner? Who is close to a meltdown because it's not working out for them? So I am constantly collecting data as these experiments are happening, and so I use STEM to build those positive connections with my students. In my first few years of teaching, which I'm only 5 years in, so probably the first 2 years, I didn't want to give my students opportunities to fail because it made me uncomfortable. And so that's so wrong, right? And so as the educator, I was more uncomfortable with my students failing, and I realized, whoa, what am I doing? I need to create a safe space for them so that they can fail. And so the STEM activities provide opportunities for them to fail, and I help them work through those moments because sometimes they get a little rough. But we use social emotional learning to help when those moments happen. And so we use the 4 zones of regulation. You see this a lot in elementary schools, but oftentimes it's left off in the secondary schools. But what I've found with my middle schoolers is if I can provide them with this tool, they're so much more vulnerable to let me know where they're truly at. And so on that first day of school, after I give them a little bit of safety directions so we don't have batteries smoking, the next thing we do is we talk about the 4 zones of regulation. And then every 5 minutes through my STEM activities, I'm constantly asking them, what zone are you in? What zone are you in? How do we move safely from one zone to the next? And so throughout the school year, I provide them with strategies. We call it mindful minutes. So we spend a few minutes every class period when they walk in to learn strategies of how do you move safely from one zone to a next. And so I've seen the benefit of using this at the middle school level. I've found that once I get connected with my students, the mathematics comes so much easier. And so I can start to show them different ways of solving problems because I've made them uncomfortable and we've already broken the ice of problem-solving skills. When we get to the strategies, it goes pretty smoothly. We still have hiccups, but we now have the 4 zones with strategies to work through the mathematics skills that sometimes are complicated for some. Next is experiential learning, and this is kind of where I get passionate. With mathematics, a lot of students, I'm having to break their negative mindset towards math. And so they walk into my classroom, they already have a preconceived notion of how a math class is going to go. And so I do everything in my power to break what they may know about math. And so some days it requires a highlighter on paper with some black lights. The math might be a little bit dry, and so I've got to get them interested and give them a little taste of, hey, it looks a little bit different today. I just want them coming back for more. I want them constantly to be wondering, what is she gonna do today? Other days we'll build a escape room within the classroom.
and students are solving integer operation questions, working together to land the spaceship. And the noise that is created on this day is like, it like makes me emotional because it's so beautiful. I'm not gonna cry, get it together. It's so beautiful to hear them working together because by this point, they've already bonded with one another. And so it's so silly to land a spaceship in math class, but it's the noise that's created that day. It's pretty great. And then once I get them interested, I've given them a little bit of a taste of what is she doing. We then start pairing it with community connections. So yesterday, actually, their assessment for percentages of markups and discounts, we took our students to the local grocery store where they applied all of their mathematics. Their goal was to get as close to their budget as possible. Students researched organizations that they could donate all of these goods to, and they brought their own money. And so they were working with real cash, real people at the register. Self-checkout was not an option because I wanted those social skills to be worked on yesterday. And so they got it done in 45 minutes. So I was super proud of them. But once again, it's allowing them to be uncomfortable in a safe space before they leave me and are out in the real world by themselves. So also with experiential learning, I give them other options to show their mastery. So for their geometry unit, instead of just a paper pencil test, which there is a time and a place for that, I give them an opportunity to show me your mastery in a way that looks different. And so this student chose origami. So they were able to show their standards, their 7th grade math standards through origami, which is beautiful. I don't think that was even an option on the menu list for that chapter. So giving them some agency in their learning and assessment. And then sometimes you just have to bring humor into it, and Bob Ross does wonders with middle school students. And so, like I said, I always want them wondering, what is she gonna do today? So I have an entire closet of costumes, and Bob Ross is a good go-to. Middle schoolers have an infatuation with Bob Ross. I don't know why, but this is a often used outfit. And then the last is global connections. Once I've formed those relationships with my students, once we've gone through some problem solving skills and we've started to get into math that can make a difference, we started to see a need that empathy was missing in our middle school students the last few years. And so the more that we dove into the United Nations global goals, we found this as an opportunity to start pairing these goals with our chapters in math. And so each chapter is paired with a different global goal, and this provides them an opportunity to apply the mathematics. I'm not one that preaches you're going to use algebra every single day of your life, but you will use problem solving skills and you'll be connecting with people. And so I use these goals to help us with that. So a taste of what this would look like is my Andover students, we look at what clothes are you wearing? How much did it cost for those clothes to be made? What country were they made in? What's a fair wage to live in that country? And so we pair this with our geography unit as well, and they really get to put themselves in other people's shoes, especially the people that made their own shoes. And so this provides an opportunity for them to really get a taste of how can this be applied and how can we make a global impact. It doesn't have to be a systematical change. It just has to be what can you do that will cause the ripple effect to happen down the line. And so the last part of global connections is me as a professional taking every opportunity that I can to continue my professional development, going on teacher field trips and just seeing what can I do with my global connections to bring back to my students, because in the end it's going to affect them ultimately. So thank you guys for letting me share a little bit about my classroom. If you want to follow along our journey, you can follow our Twitter page, or you can send me an email if any of you would like to peek in and kind of see what we're all about. So thank you guys for having me.
They might have some questions.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for what you do and do on a regular basis, especially with the math in the classroom. Looks like a fun place. Maybe I would come out and learn some new math.
That'd be great. We'd love to have you.
Great thing to do. So thank you, and we appreciate what you do.
Thanks.
And how you work with your students, and obviously you're working with the other teachers too.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments, board? I'm not sure. I'm assuming the hand waving is working. Oh, microphone might be on. Hello? The light's on. Okay, Steve Roberts.
Thank
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much and congratulations.
Thank you.
I read an essay yesterday that suggested that we should virtually abandon practice in early grades for experiential and project learning. And I'm of the opinion that we need a balance. That we need to practice our arithmetic, boys and girls, when we're 6 and 7 and 8 years old. Now, you have 7th graders, so they're typically about 12. Do you find that your students come to you, some of them with a lack of basic arithmetic skills?
Yes, yes. And I would agree with you with the balance. And so when I first started, I was probably too heavy on the experiential learning part of it, and I wasn't balancing it well enough with how can we use this for good. And so, but going to the lower levels, what we're finding now is we've got to have a consistency within the building with teachers. What vocabulary are we using so that when they get to the higher levels, we're aware of, oh, that's how they've been referring to it for so many years. So yes, I agree that it needs to be a balance at the early levels.
And at your level, do you do any practice sort of stuff?
Oh, yes. Yep. We do a lot of benchmark, fraction, decimal percents. It's really heavy in the 7th grade standards, so we're constantly making sure that we are fluent in those.
Music to my ears. Thank you.
Other questions or comments, board members? Michelle.
Madam Chair, so did you have a teacher that inspired you? Someone that kind of set that, like, that tone for you to carry that out in your classroom? I was just curious what inspired you to kind of do that in your own classroom.
I don't know if you know Brad Nix. He teaches at Shawnee Heights High School. And when I was a senior, he actually won the Milken Educator Award. And so I was in the audience when he won. And so he was the first educator that kind of was like, hey, have you ever thought about this? He'd be gone for track or football, and he started to leave sub-plans in my name. And so I wouldn't know, and he'd be gone, and the sub would say, is there a Carly Hansen at the time? You're teaching the lesson. And I was like, what? And next thing I knew, I started teaching each lesson, and I started to fall in love with the craft of teaching. So then my senior year, I was a teacher aide for him, but we kind of manipulated it between the two of us, where he started teaching me teaching strategies my senior year before I then went to Emporia State. So Brad Nix is the guy. Yeah.
He was there.
Yes, and he was there when I won. So if you see any of the pictures or videos, it was very emotional.
He was as emotional as Carly was.
Yeah.
Really. He was.
Well, Carly, we have a certificate for you, and we'd like to take a picture.
Yeah.
So, Dale?
One last thing I just want to say, that too, we also have an honor to have a Super Bowl photojournalist here today.
Oh.
Yeah, not everybody got to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty special, but okay, got something for you right here, right in front.
Amended for earlier. We're going to have an update on the coronavirus and guidance that's been being given and will continue to be given to the schools. So Susan McMahon is here, and we appreciate you coming today. I'm sure we'll have questions, and but we are probably on a little limited time schedule today. So, but Susan, welcome. We're glad to have you today.
Thank you, Madam Chair and board members. I appreciate the invitation to come talk to you today. We are working with our 286 school districts and some of our private schools across the state to get them ready for the COVID-19 virus that is out there that the whole nation is dealing with now. It's being passed out right now. On Friday, they emailed you some guidance that we gave to the school districts. And then over the weekend, we were notified that we actually have a presumptive positive here in Johnson County. And so what we did early Monday morning was give new guidance with, and that is what you're being handed out right now. So that guidance is if you do have COVID-19 within your community, what school districts are supposed to do. We're going to, I meet with Randy sometimes daily, weekly, every Thursday morning now. The Department of Health and Environment now has a webinar that I listen into. And then the commissioner and I get together afterwards and do our strategy and what we're going to push out to the school districts and how we're going to help them with the new information that we receive. The biggest thing that everyone needs to understand is this is fluid. It changes minute by minute. According to Dr. Lee Norman, who's the Secretary of the Health and Environment Department, we have changes at every day on their website. If you go to their COVID-19 section on their website, you will see updates every day, usually around 5 o'clock. And so that will keep everybody informed of what is going on, what is actively being tested, and what they are looking at. So what we have done is, in our guidance, it says that KSDE is working towards the preparedness and preparation of COVID-19 across all of our school districts. The governor is right. This is still low, but we do need to be vigilant, and we do need to start preparing for what is coming ahead. So with our updates that we have done, we are only taking our information that we pass to the schools from the Center Disease, CDC, and KDHE. And they give it to us, we look it over, and then we tweak it for Kansas, because it's just nationwide, and some things don't fit in the middle of the United States. So we make it relevant for us. And we give it back to KDHE, they bless it, and then we send it out, and they put it on their website. What we have done is, with this and the other document you received, is the EPA's list of approved cleaning products, what actually can kill the virus if it's on a surface. And so we have also sent that out to the school districts of what to use to clean with, and what we are using in-house to here. We also have guidance that is waiting to be approved by the USDA. Cheryl Johnson is collaborating with us. And once we get that approval, we will also push that out, but it has to deal with the meal program that she's in charge of, and how to get meals to our students when you cannot congregate. So those are the things that we are actively working towards right now to get that guidance out to our school districts too. As you've known over the last couple weeks, everything has been out there about the virus. The one thing I really want you to understand is that it is about good hygiene. Washing hands, using your hand sanitizer has to be at the minimum 60%, preferably 70%. Anything under that is not effective. And so that's what that EPA list does, is I walked schools through how to use that guidance. And in there, it does say it gives you what the wipes need to be at. And so they can look at their wipes that they have on hand and look at what is on that paper to make sure that theirs is effective too. And so those are the things that we are working for, and fielding those phone calls from our school districts. The best thing we can do is understand and educate ourselves and be calm. Be calm about this. We are good, and we work diligently during the flu season, and that is what we're going to be doing with this too. It's person to person, community spread. So far, as of an hour ago, has not happened in the state of Kansas. So those are the things we need to be mindful of. It is a lower respiratory infection. So I'm telling people, if you've had the flu, the muscle achy flu, bronchitis, pneumonia type feeling, it's that sudden shortness of breath that makes the difference between the flu and the COVID-19 virus. It is affecting more of the older you are, the harder it is on your body. And if you have any pre-existing health conditions, that is also a key factor in how you need to guard yourself. If you're sick, stay home type thing. We say this every year, but we actually have to start governing it in every agency and walk of life. And like I said, hygiene, hygiene, hygiene. Social distancing, if you haven't heard it, now it's a new buzzword. We haven't had any call for that in the state of Kansas as of an hour ago. So what I did field phone calls this morning from the Kansas Athletic Association, We talked with Johnson County Public Health and KDHE and got the go-ahead for the state competitions that start tomorrow. So those are going to go on unless something drastically happens in the next 12 to 24 hours. Right now, we are pushing them forward. They have pushed out a document, and the biggest thing, and especially in bold, that they have across their whole document is if you're sick, stay home. You know, it doesn't matter. They really don't want anybody sick into those gyms for the basketball tournaments and things. We're seeing a lot of different level sports being canceled, changed across the nation. But we are given our guidance through KDHE, and we are using them as, you know, our sounding board of what our schools should do. And then right now there's no no mandated quarantines that affect schools. No school closings right now at the moment, and no canceling of gatherings in general. In Kansas, we don't have any social distancing that's being required. With the case that is in Johnson County, that patient has been moved to KU Med, and they have her family is under isolation in their home. And that is how they're working with that one. And the public health, the one thing they really stressed in one of the webinars was that it is the local public health departments and the school district, the school board, who will all get together and decide on the school closing. So if public health comes back to KDHE and states that the school is refusing to close, I just need you to be mindful of that the governor, the secretary of the KDHE, and the adjutant general can override that school district and they can close them. But they do not want to be put in that situation. So those are the things that we need to really look at and see. Last night's update from KDHE at 5:30 p.m. is they have 1 positive, 17 negatives, 21 persons under investigation. So that could be anything from they have traveled back and they've self-quarantined, or they're watching them through a kind of isolation period, because some people have isolated themselves. That's fine with them. And that's who they are watching as of 5:30 last night. And it always changes. And then the close contact being monitored is the 3 family members of the infected persons. Like I said, if you want the notification that went out by the Athletic Association, let me know and I'll have Peggy send that out to you. The interim guidance that we have given to you, please look at. If you have any questions, please let us know. Dr. Mark Thompson and I are collaborating together on these products, along with KDHE, and the different things that we are doing to make sure all of our schools are getting the correct information at that time. At this time, we also want to let you know CDC provided a product on the foreign exchange student program, and I tasked Dr. Thompson with keeping up with that, so I'm going to let him brief you on that.
Thank you, Susan. I had the pleasure of being part of H1N1 preparation, so what goes around comes around. But as Susan mentioned, we did receive some interim guidance from the CDC on foreign exchange and study abroad programs that was initially targeted at colleges, but they recognized that high schools also were involved in such programs. The initial guidance indicated that schools here should send their foreign exchange students home, and U.S. students that were abroad should be brought back home. We disagreed with this guidance for a number of reasons. One is that it did not address the rate of the virus in either of here or in the other country. Also, so many other issues, whether it's financial, course credit, a number of things came into play. So we made edits to the document indicating that the guidance that we would support would not be for us to immediately send students home or immediately bring students home without the consultation with local and regional health departments and medical professionals. We also then established contact with the principal in the Auburn-Washburn School District who handles or is very involved in their foreign exchange program to find out what kind of guidance they have been receiving. They had not received any in particular, but he directed us to the Kansas State High School Athletics Association, who is very involved in the foreign exchange process, foreign exchange student process. They in turn directed us to an individual who is involved with an organization that provides such guidance for a number of entities that work with schools. And so the guidance that we received from him was that they have not developed any specific guidance themselves. They are doing what we are doing, which is operating following the guidance of the Center for Disease Control, the U.S. State Department, and in their case, the World Health Organization. They have not developed anything specific for the exchange students. We do have a call set up with him tomorrow to talk about that in greater depth. But just wanted to give you an update on kind of how we process the interim guidance, and that we are not just rubber stamping that, we are truly looking at it from what it's like in Kansas and how best to approach it.
And also on that guidance too, it highly suggested to either cancel or postpone exchange student programs for next year. So I stand for questions.
Okay, board members will probably take about 10 minutes and do questions. That being in mind, when we had questions when we start, why don't you ask one question, then we'll move to another person. So we'll start with Ben.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a question that I've received from my superintendents on a meeting I had last week. And it was, if they choose to do the 14-day quarantine as the guidance document does lend itself to direct, at least the 14 days, they don't have 14 days built in the calendar. And this is a reiteration of how do we as a department support that education to extend the school year into June. I know we've had special circumstances like Greensburg, but I think it's a good opportunity to redirect, how we support districts that if it does happen, that, we get education to the students.
So the answer to that is, if it happens, we'll give guidance. Since it hasn't happened, we're not giving guidance on something that hasn't happened yet. Right. So if we have to take, and we're talking about mass, then we'll evaluate that just like we did Greensburg or Chapman before that. But at this point, we haven't called off school for that reason.
Other questions, board members? Yeah,
there you go.
How frequently are you giving school districts, I guess I should say, updates?
We have been, as they come in,
okay.
Basically, I think this is their third piece of guidance in 2 weeks. And like I said, KDHE has moved to Thursday morning webinars, and then the commissioner and I meet in the afternoon, and then we push the product out either that night or Friday morning.
So the schools know they'll at least receive a weekly update,
right,
if not more often than that.
True.
Okay.
And Susan's really good when we do that to say replace your previous, because we're trying to give you the most current update as possible.
Right.
And Ben, I would say we do have plans. If we have to do it, we can suspend in an emergency, but we have to get to that stage before we actually suspend the time.
Janet, question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm getting a lot of questions. I have about 20 in here on my just message, but I want to ask them. I just want to say that I'm assuming from what you said, Randy, that these things will be made when these events happen. Is that correct? Because I've been asked questions about like if there's a huge absenteeism, and because of this thing, and well, yet we're still open, will we still test? I mean, things like that. I mean, there's a lot of questions. I mean, about will we still pay our employees? I mean, I can give you 20 questions. So my answer could be when this happens, we will make decisions will be made at that time.
Correct. As Susan said, at minimum, we're coming out with guidance every week. In the case of this week, we've already come out with, or last week, this week, we've already,
Friday and
yesterday,
Monday.
right?
Right.
Yeah, we worked on the weekend. So we might come out with more frequent guidance as things develop over time. We don't want to panic people. So that's, I mean, we don't need to have contingency for everything that may occur. But as it occurs or starts to look like it will occur, we will move on that. I sent all of you, I just issued this morning a travel ban for our agency relative through the month of April so that they can plan appropriately as we were having more and more conferences cancel, on the fly after arrangement. So the best answer, Janet, is we have plans. We will implement those plans as CDC and the Department of Health and Environment tell us that it's now appropriate because we have other cases.
Right. And we, the commissioner, Mr. Dennis, Wendy, and I have a meeting of all state agencies tomorrow morning. And so for our agency too, it's not just our school districts. We are working with our agency personnel too to keep them safe. And then we give out that guidance at the same intervals. If something's changed, our employees get that information too at the same time.
So should the school districts also be in contact with their local county health?
They have to 100% be collaborating with their local public health. That is their key piece of, not just us, but their key piece of information is going to come from that agency at the local level. We do have one school district that we will see what happens. One of their groups in their school decided to continue with their cruise. And so they're out on a cruise ship right now. So we will see what happens to them when they come back to port. So it's, like I said, this is fluid, no matter who you are, where you are, what we're doing. We are constantly understanding what is happening with our school districts and knowing what they're trying to anticipate their needs before they become a need.
So when you send out, and I guess this is more to Randy, when you send out updates to the school districts, will we also get that?
Yes, they will be included at least in your Friday notes. And
Okay.
if we're doing multiple like we did today, I'll send that immediately out to you to say this is the latest version. You also ought to look at the date on those, at least the weekly updates. Then if you like to archive them, you're fine to archive them, but always refer back to the most recent because they will change.
And that's something that we really need to stress is this historical documentation of what we do. Because when this first came down 2 weeks ago, out of 250 some employees, only one had H1N1 information. So we have got to keep that historical data so we can go back and say, this is what we did for this. And so that is what we're trying to also accomplish at the same time.
So board members, additional questions? We got a few more minutes. Okay, well, Susan, thank you very much. Mark, thank you very much. We appreciate the update. I have a feeling this isn't the last we're going to hear from you, but we appreciate your update. We appreciate your work that you're doing to help our schools. Thank you very much. Okay, board members, we will recess for lunch. We'll be back at 1:30. Thank you. I'd like to call the afternoon session of the Kansas State Board of Education back to order. I'd like to welcome, we've got a lot of folks here this afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody here. We're excited to have everybody here. We have a special opportunity this afternoon, and actually Janet Waugh is going to introduce our next item. So Janet, if you would please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is really exciting for me because this is where I began, is in PTA. I started off as a room mother, and look at me now. This is what room mothers do. But anyway, I've known Patty Urich. I don't even know how to pronounce your name. Urich. Okay, I got it now. I've known her for years and years and years. I knew her when she was just a room mother. And now she is the president-elect of the Kansas PTA. And I'm so proud of her. She has worked so hard and done such a great job. And I had this whole speech thing written for me, but I didn't use it. But anyway, welcome, Patty, and thank you for all you do. And thank you to all your PTAs. And we're looking to hear about the schools of excellence. So thank you.
Thank you, Janet. First off, it's a pleasure to be here this morning to recognize 7 outstanding Kansas PTAs and schools. As Janet said, I'm Patty Urich, Kansas PTA President-elect, and with me today is Sarah Dunn. She's going to hide back there. She's our Kansas PTA Family Engagement Chairman, and she has worked with the units throughout the cycle of what they doing the application and being there as a support system for them and tracking them as well. And so we appreciate all that she has done to help move this along. I'm going to give a brief overview of the National PTA School of Excellence program and then proceed into presenting each honoree with their framed certificate from Kansas PTA. We hope to end a little early so you can ask questions if you like. You might have some of those. The goal of the National PTA School of Excellence program is for PTAs to partner with their schools to engage families in student success and continuous school improvement, thus enrich the educational experience and overall well-being of all students. Through this free program, the PTA and the school work collaboratively to assess how families feel their school measures up to a number of research-based key indicators for effective family engagement. These indicators are framed around the National PTA Standards for Family School Partnerships, which this board endorsed in 2008. The principal and the PTA are also surveyed using similar assessment tools. The PTA and the school then identified a shared school improvement goal and objective based on the National Standards for Family School Partnerships. The focus was to be on one of 3 areas: improving family engagement in education, ensuring students' health and safety, and supporting arts and education. They then submit their goal and their initial assessment results to National PTA. National PTA sends them a custom roadmap that gives them specific suggestions and resources. They also receive access to a dedicated area of the National PTA website populated with a wealth of resources and tools. The PTA and the school worked on their shared improvement goal and reevaluated the families, the principal, and the PTA at the end of the school year. The pre- and post-assessments are called the Family School Partnership Scans. The final scan results with the narrative were submitted to National PTA by June 1st and evaluated during the summer. The evaluation was based on their own progress, giving their beginning resources. Each school PTA was evaluated on its own merits. The second week, in August, our 7 outstanding PTA and schools were notified that they were a National School of Excellence Award recipient. The designation is for 2 years, so it's from 2019 to 2021. Our hope is that all PTAs and PTA schools in Kansas will participate in this outstanding program to make sure that their families feel welcomed and empowered to support student success, and that PTA is a key partner for continuous school improvement. And now to honor our 7 outstanding PTAs and schools, our 2019-2021 School of Excellence Award recipients. They worked extremely hard last year breaking down barriers to engage families in ways that made a substantial and positive impact on their school and on student success. When I call your PTA and school name, will you please come forward to the podium so I can introduce you? Sarah and I will then present you with your certificate, and I would ask that the next group be prepared to come forward immediately when called, and afterwards then we will do some group photos up front with your representative. First off, I'd like to call Frank Russian Elementary PTA and Frank Russian Elementary School. Will you please come forward? hold that up there high. Come on in. It's my honor to introduce from Frank Russian PTA, School PTA, their president, Lisa Hamrick, their principal, Tamika McCauley, Chief of Staff, Stephen Linkos, and Instructional Improvement Officer, Kimberly Shaw. Congratulations to Frank Russian School PTA and Frank Russian School. Don't go away, because we'll do photos at the end. Next, we have New York Elementary PTA and New York Elementary School. Would you please come forward? It's my honor to introduce from New York Elementary School PTA, their president, Jamie St. Viva, and the New York Elementary School principal, Sunny Halstead, and their Lawrence District Director of Elementary Schools, Darcy Krause. Congratulations, New York Elementary School and PTA. Belinda Elementary PTA and School. There we go. I would like to point out that during the short existence of the National PTA School of Excellence program, which began in 2013, this will be Belinda's second time to apply for and to receive the designation as a National PTA School of Excellence, which demonstrates one of the program's intended goals for systemic, integrated, and continuous improvement in the area of family engagement. It's my honor to introduce from Belinda Elementary School, their school principal, Stephen Yeoman. Congratulations, Belinda Elementary School and PTA. Next off is East Antioch Elementary PTA and School. Would you please come forward? And it's on there too. Just a little further down, oh my God. Okay, from East Elementary School, I'm honored to introduce their PTA President, Amber Pittman, their Secretary, Jamie Orlick, East Antioch School Principal, Felicia Nedalicki. I'm so sorry. And their Superintendent, Dr. Michael Fulton. Congratulations, East Antioch Elementary School and PTA. Next is Tomahawk Elementary PTA and Tomahawk Elementary School. Please come forward. It's my honor to introduce from Tomahawk Elementary School PTA, co-presidents Jennifer Gentry and Jamie Kapke, and Tomahawk Elementary School Principal Brian Watson, and of course, their superintendent, Dr. Fulton. Congratulations, Tomahawk Elementary School. Is anybody here from Indian Hills Middle School? I was told that they would not be because they had, yes. So, and I do have you down there. They wanted just to verify because sometimes people slip in when you have been told one thing. But if Dr. Fulton would be willing to accept their award today and present it to them at a later time, I'd be very grateful.
I'd be happy to.
Yes. And this is also Indian Hill's second time to receive this designation as a school of excellence. Congratulations, Indian Hill. Next is, last is Shawnee Mission East High School PTA and Shawnee Mission East High School, Shawnee Mission East High School. Oh my goodness, tripping over myself. Please come forward. It's again my honor to introduce the Shawnee Mission East High School President Margot Michelson and Shawnee Mission East High School Principal Scott Sherman, and of course, Dr. Fulton. Congratulations. And also, Shawnee Mission East is also, this is their second time to receive this designation. So very much congratulations, and we appreciate the effort again.
And after winning, Dr. Sherman and I have now become the only PTA president and principal in national PTA history to attain the award at 2 different schools.
What other school did you get it at?
We did the Indian Hills.
Oh, you guys just moved up. That's pretty cool. Okay, so if we wanted to go ahead and proceed on with our group photos, we'd kind of like to do all the schools together.
I think, let's see if there's any questions from the board first.
There you
They
go.
may have some questions, and then we'll do pictures. We're very used to doing pictures.
Very good, Kathy.
We know how to do that.
Yes.
So board members, any questions anybody has? I'm sure Janet probably does. And
I don't have questions. I just want to thank you so much. I know how much PTA does. I know how hard you all work. And I know, and this, you're playing right into our vision. This is so important to us that we have community involvement in our schools and parental involvement. And anyway, thank you. And I know you guys aren't paid a whole lot. And so we thank, but we do thank you so much for your service because, you know, I know, and like I said I'd known Patty for so long, and she's continued to push and work and give everything she can. And I'm so proud of what she's accomplished, and I'm so proud of what you've accomplished, because these are not easy things to achieve. I recognize the value of a national award. We gave state awards when I was on the state board, and they were pretty big, but this is really big. So congratulations and thank you so much.
any questions? Anybody else from the board? I'd just like to echo what Janet said, the parent involvement, the community involvement, that is so critical to the success, as we say, of each child. So thank you for what you do. It's wonderful. And I think it was a couple years ago, I came up to Kansas City, and Janet and I went to a PTA workshop or something. We talked kind of about advocacy and stuff. So it was a great opportunity to speak to some of the PTA folks up in the Kansas City area. So really appreciate that opportunity. So we will do pictures, and maybe we'll start, what we'll do is right in front of here, and we'll do like the board member from the representative district. First of all, from Shawnee Mission, we have the Shawnee Mission schools, and then we have Janet and Steve and Michelle are all in that group. So if you kind of want to get up here, we'll do some pictures. And thank you. We didn't have certificates, did we?
Make a comment. One of the things that I think is really helpful, especially when looking at why would you want to do the School of Excellence, and from an administrator standpoint, it's a great tool to establish what you're doing well, what you're not doing so well, and where you can improve in at. And it really is good for that. But I'd also like to thank our PTAs, schools, superintendents, and board who have all supported this program. And thank you for allowing us the honor to honor these outstanding 2019-2021 National PTA School of Excellence recipients. So thank you for allowing us to be here today and to allow us to recognize their achievements. I applaud everything that you guys do to help support us. We're going to ask you guys to think about one thing that you did that you thought was, as part of what you did for School of Excellence, that that you got out of this, or something that you thought was very helpful and that you really enjoyed doing during this. So, all right. And you were with the high school.
Hi, everybody. I'm Margot Michelson from Shawnee Mission East. I just kind of wanted to let you know a little bit, as she mentioned, there were 3 overriding categories, but then within those categories, you were told to choose one specific mission that your school would be working on. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we did. So for the 2018-2019 year, our PTSA focused on the area of health and safety, as she mentioned. The award was given to the school in August 2019, and we were the only high school in the state of Kansas to receive that award. We pointed out in our essay that we wrote and submitted to the National PTA that Shawnee Mission East was the school district leader in preparing administrators and students for emergencies, specifically for gun violence situations. The mission was simple at our school: be proactive, not reactive. Teachers were trained and empowered by school safety personnel and local police how to tailor their classrooms' emergency preparedness to their own specific needs, where they are located in the school, which doors and exits are safest, classroom supplies that could be used as barricades, to mention a few examples. In fact, teachers at Highlands Elementary School use these specific strategies developed at our high school when they tragically had a shooting incident on March 1st, 2019. Our PTSA was a leader, in fact, the first in the district to purchase all school evac go bags for teachers. These were to be used if a teacher had to flee their classroom quickly, possibly with an injured student. In fact, the Shawnee Mission East emergency model was so innovative that police and school safety personnel traveled from across America to our Center for Academic Achievement in July 2019 to hear from Dr. Sherman and other panelists. We just want to congratulate all the recipients and to parents, faculty, and staff who work every day to make all of our schools a safe place to learn and achieve. Thank you.
I'm Jamie Kafke, and I'm from Tomahawk Elementary. And it was really a pleasure to do this application and to find out directly from the parents what they thought about Tomahawk. I know what I thought about Tomahawk, but I put together the SurveyMonkey survey to all the parents, and overwhelmingly, we got a positive response over the board about what we were doing at Tomahawk, and that was so fulfilling as a PTA member to know we are really doing the right things, and to fill out this application and to let you all know that we are the hidden gem in Shawnee Mission, and we're just so excited to be here. So thank you so much.
Lawrence? Oh, wait.
Thank you for this opportunity to be here from New York Elementary, and I really appreciate the Schools for Excellence process since we were a new PTA and didn't really know how to focus our energy and efforts, and it really led us along this nice finding out how to get quantitative data, which then led to us needing to find out more qualitative data. So we went out and really asked teachers what's going on in the classrooms, and we learned that we need to be focusing on how to create a more trauma-informed school. And we had a lot of support from our district. We had a lot of support from our principal and the teachers and paras. And I also just want to say PTA is outstanding because it is an advocacy program. And our teachers and our paras, they cannot advocate for themselves as the employees of state employees. And so we really feel it's our mission to be their voices. And so that was really powerful to get to help see what we could do to say, pay more for our teachers, pay more for our paras. Anyways, thanks again for letting us be here.
Hello. I'm Felicia Nedelecki, principal at East Antioch Elementary School, and I'm in the Shawnee Mission School District. And our goal that we focused on was to ensure health and safety of our students. And with that objective, we chose to focus on emotional and mental well-being as well as parent communication. And so along with our mental well-being, we focused on trying to open the doors of opportunities for all parents, staff in the entire Shawnee Mission community, not just our building. And so we ended up collaborating with social workers across the district. Mrs. Chauvin was our school social worker that helped lead that, and we sponsored parent informational seminars. So in September we collaborated with First Call on Drinking and Drug Awareness and invited parents to be able to come talk to counselors and learn about that so that they knew what to expect with their children. Then in November, we partnered up with Speak Up and a middle school on suicide awareness. And then in January, we partnered with Pathways to Hope, Johnson County Mental Health, and Jewish Family Services on mental health and wellness. And then in the spring, we collaborated with Sunflower House on keeping our kids safe online. And we felt like by doing all of those things, we tried to find a well-rounded opportunity for all parents within our community. And then we also discussed how it was important to make East Antioch feel more like a community and get kids and parents more involved in different activities in our school. And so we started creating club days. And our club days allowed our teachers to bring something to school that helped them to bring something in that they were passionate about, that they love to do. So, for example, sewing or cooking. And it gave kids an opportunity to learn something different that they don't typically do at school, but it still involved activities, including parents, MVPs, and our Caring for Kids partners. And so we added that to our building as well, and it's been hugely successful. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have 2 schools left. KCK's coming up.
Okay, I'm from Frank Rushton Elementary in Kansas City, Kansas, and we are a relatively new PTA. I think we've been established for 2 years, 2.5 years. In that time, we've continued to improve our family engagement and involvement. Our biggest exciting thing from this year was a brand new school playground, updated one that was like 50 years old or something, so that our kids were really stoked about. And just continuing to bring events into the school and bring families to enjoy Frank Rushton.
Belinda? I was like, I know he's over there somewhere. I know you were.
Thanks for recognizing us today. My PTA president was unable to attend, but I think were she to be here, she would echo that the parent partnership at Belinda, that's one of our strongest school attributes without question. I think this School of Excellence, it's not so much just about the recognition, but the work that goes into the application process, because it really asks us to dig in a little bit deeper and to audit some things at our school and to connect with families that may otherwise not feel like they have a voice. So it's a really, really valuable process. And anyway, thank you for having us today. Appreciate it.
That's all we have.
We have one question, Steve Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would direct this really to anyone. It might be for Dr. Fulton or anyone from USD 512 about the tendency for us to, in the effort to keep our children safe, to not welcome the public into our schools on election day, that we're using more churches, fewer schools. This is not a trend that I think is particularly healthy. I don't know if the PTA gets to weigh in on these sorts of decisions. I don't know if it's more of a function of the local school board, but the decisions to not use schools as polling places, can you speak to that? Thank you, Dr. Fulton.
Well, I think certainly public schools are public, right? And they are paid for with public funds. And yet we also know that we live in a world where safety is both a priority and a concern. So in our area and really across the country, you are starting to see a movement away from using schools and toward using other public spaces. The reason for that is security gets extremely difficult in schools. You know, to get into a school, you enter, and then you have to go someplace usually to vote, whether it's a gym or some other part of the building. And when the public's moving back and forth through those areas, class is taking place unless you decide to not have school that day. So I think for us, certainly we want the public involved in our schools, but we also want to create a safe environment. And when you have voting, you lose a lot of control over who enters into the schoolhouse door. So philosophically, I don't disagree, but pragmatically, it's become an issue where safety has to become the first and most important priority. You're welcome.
Well, again, thanks to all of our schools, all of the PTA members and the administration that came to support this. We really, what you do helps with our mission of leading the world in the success of each student. I mean, that's, as you can see up on our walls, we talk about that. Our students come first in every board decision and our mission. So thank you for all that you do and what you're doing to engage the families and the communities in your schools. So we really appreciate you coming over and taking the time to share some things with us today. It's always a highlight when we get to have students or parents come and join us at the board meeting. So thanks again. We appreciate you coming. You are. Unless you want to stay for the rest of the meeting, you can always do that. Yeah, you could come back tomorrow, all right?
You're missing the school bell. You're dismissed.
Dismissed. Yes, I need the school bell. Thank you very much. We appreciate you all coming.